different items that we are going to address. And the first one is roll call.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Bartoni,
Here.
Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Garitano,
Here.
Councilmember Nyan,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo, and Chair McCutcheon.
Here.
We have a quorum, ma'am.
Thank you. Are there any comments or changes to the minutes from the meeting of March 16th? Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes? Ms. Nyad and Mr. Flasher? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain?
I'll
Motion-
abstain, Deb. I'll abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. Motion passes. Do we have any public speakers?
With your permission, I'll let Mr. Newberry take it over from here.
Yes, please. On my laptop, I cannot see who is waiting to speak or not as far as the public goes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have two in attendance via Zoom, and they have both raised their hand. I apologize, I didn't see which order they raised their hand, so I'll just go with the first that appears on the list. Mr. Smith.
Welcome, Mr. Smith.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can see you and hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, a double bonus. Thank you all very much for allowing us to speak and for your support on City Council, and we really appreciate it. I just sent a note late today, and you may or may not have had an opportunity to read it. I'll just kind of hit the highlights and keep it very brief. First of all, we're really excited about the progress that seems to be made at the Lisk farm. It right now seems to be pretty quiet. So overall, we're very happy with that. We just have a couple of concerns. After reading the report that Joe sent out recently, we know Mr. Lisk has, from what you guys have said, has replaced the new units. Our biggest concern is that those units have not been verified by the city, unless I'm incorrect. We have some real objection to voting on the Section 6, item B1 outlined in Joe's document until we know we can have that verification that those units have in fact been replaced and they've been inspected or looked at by the city. That's really our only objection to this. Overall, we're glad with the progress, and we think it's the most progress we've seen in the whole time we've been working on this issue. So that is a really good thing, but I would just encourage the council to, or the committee to take that into consideration before moving forward on any approvals. Then lastly, we disagree with the comments that Mr. Lisk has been denied his rights. He's had every opportunity to be able to fix these things, and he still continues to have not fixed it until just recently when the pressure is really being put on him. So I applaud you guys for, and probably Dr. Thunder as well, for moving this forward and getting it going, but we're not there yet. So the sooner we can get there, the better we will all be. And you won't have to put up with us at every meeting. So thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, the next hand that is raised in the Zoom is Ms. Fisher. Give me a moment to remove Mr. Smith. And
Ms. Fisher, welcome to the Planning and Parks Committee.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can.
All of you have heard me drone on in various meetings, committees, you name it. So I won't, in the interest of time, I won't reiterate everything I've told you over the last 8.5 years. And I will just say that Gil was much more eloquent than I could ever be. And I read his comments, and I just wanted to reiterate that we could not agree more on every point that he made. And thank you again for all your work on this and for what appears to be some real progress. So we're cautiously optimistic still. And again, my husband and I absolutely agree with everything that Gil has said this evening. So thanks again.
Thank you. Mr. Newberry, any other public participation?
Madam Chair, we did have one other join us after I gave the initial instruction. If that individual, Mr. Hudson, would like to speak during the public comment session, if he would use the raise hand feature on Zoom or put something in chat. Give it a moment. Thank you. Madam Chair and committee members, Mr. Hudson put a comment in the chat, but he's saying he doesn't need to speak.
Thank you.
And
Any other participants?
yes, ma'am, I'm sorry. Mr. Smith appears to have raised his hand again.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you.
My apologies. It was an error. I was trying to lower my hand and I must have sent the alert. Travis, apologize.
No problem. Thank you. The joys of Zoom.
Yes, yes. Any more?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. So our first action item is under planning matters. The first one is changes to the zoning ordinance and no noise code for the constant emitters of noise, all wards. Mr. Bunich?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, a couple of introductory remarks relative to this particular topic before the department hopefully provides a brief presentation on the items for action at tonight's meeting. First and foremost, Mr. Smith did send out a comment letter this afternoon. I know that many of you were copied on the letter from Mr. Smith, but I did send it out from the department as well so that you could have the availability of the comments as soon as possible. Secondly, I have talked and communicated with Mr. Lisk 3 times since our last discussion on this topic, and I have updated one of the critical questions the committee had back at the February meeting, and I will go into detail on that here in a few minutes. But I just wanted to assure you that from the perspective of the department, we have reached out to Mr. Lisk and done our best to engage him in this process. And so from that perspective, he's been very cooperative. Thirdly, I know that there was a hope that all of this could have been to you much sooner than it was. I always hate to start presentations or meetings with apologies, but I think all of you are aware that the department is a bit short-handed, so we're doing our best. And your patience and tolerance of the department is much appreciated. And then finally, Mr. Hudson did provide a comment in chat that relates to the equipment that Dr. Thunder may use in any future testing. And we'll make sure that Dr. Thunder is aware of Mr. Hudson's comment relative to the minimum sound level that can be analyzed by the testing equipment. With that, Madam Chair and members of the committee, the department has provided to you a recommendation report relating to 3 of the 6 items that this committee identified back in 2020 for consideration relating to the noise code. Those 3 items are specific to creating a nighttime ambient background level of noise, retaining or changing the definition of nighttime hours, and then restoring permitted uses to existing aquaculture operations to avoid concerns relating to the property. In the report, the department is still recommending the 45 decibel level as the nighttime ambient background level of noise. And again, that comes from discussions that the department held, Mr. Newberry and I, with Dr. Thunder and his son, Steve Thunder. And for the most part, we did explore one of the questions the committee asked to be considered. And that was if there was a way to define the ambient background level and then use that instead of just a single decibel standard. And there are ways to accomplish that. I described them in the report, such as a safety net approach. But as Dr. Thunder, his son, Mr. Newberry, and I discussed it more, it became apparent that it's a complicated process establishing those background levels. And from an enforcement standpoint, which is of a critical importance to the Department of Planning, it becomes, I think, almost untenable to do. So at the conclusion of our discussion, I believe Dr. Thunder was satisfied with the 45 decibel level, but also acknowledged that the 45 decibel level standard for that nighttime ambient background level of noise cannot be less than the background level of noise, so to speak. So here's what I'm explaining. Let's say our standard is 45 decibels, but in a certain location along Route 100, that ambient level after testing is at 48. Well, in the proposed wording, that 48 would be the standard for there. 45 is the base, but if the circumstances are such, then the ambient level is measured on a case-by-case basis, given characteristics. We believe that's an appropriate approach to address. The question number 2, have all the units, the blowers, aerators, been replaced? Yes, they have. And to correct an error or misstatement on the department's part, they are all new equipment, and that was completed in time for tonight's meeting. I do want to emphasize to all that as part of a contract that was approved by City Council at its last meeting in April, Dr. Thunder is prepared to do the verification testing to basically check Mr. Lisk operation equipment. The money has been set aside, and it's just a matter of scheduling Dr. Thunder and Mr. Lisk so as the city's consultant can gain access to the property. So tonight, the Department of Planning is recommending a change from 50 decibel to 45 decibels for the nighttime ambient background level of noise. It is recommending no change to how nighttime hours are defined. They would stay at 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And the department is also recommending that the permitted uses in the NU non-urban resident district be restored to the 10-acre property owned by Mr. Lisk. I'll conclude by saying that if you're concerned relative to the verification occurring before any action is taken, by the time this would reach legislative level at City Council, and with the cooperation of Mr. Lisk and the availability of Dr. Thunder, I think we could have those test results completed. And then if they are not, then the legislation could be postponed, or if they are, then certainly proceed. And with that, I'll conclude, and the department's available for any questions regarding its memorandum. And as always, thank you for your attention.
Ms. Dodwell?
Thank you, Chair McCune. I just wanted to tell Joe I appreciate the fact that you explained the process we still need to go through in order to come to a final resolution on this. I do think it's imperative that we get the testing completed by Mr. Thunder so that we have some valid information to make an assessment on prior to sending a final ruling to City Council for a final vote. So if we can move quickly to get Mr. Thunder established out there. And I guess my other question is, would we be required to let Mr. Lisk know when those tests are going on? Or is it possible to do those tests unannounced?
Well, certainly, Dr. Thunder has mentioned that if access could not be gained to the property, there's a way to test, obviously, on the boundary line. Mr. Smith and Mr. Goulis have always said that their property is available to the city for any use in this regard.
Mhm.
And then another sound meter can be set up somewhere removed, and then a background level established, and then extrapolated based upon the formulas they use for acoustical analysis.
Mhm.
But I think Mr. Lisk would be glad to accommodate, but we do need his permission to be on property.
And so you're going to be moving forward to gain that permission?
Yes, if the committee says tonight they want to hold off until the next meeting in May to take final action, then I would try to schedule that. As you know, there's another memorandum in the packet that explains that I believe Steve Thunder, who did the testing, the original testing at the aquaculture operation, is going to be in town in early May.
Mhm.
Any other comments?
Ms.
Mr.
Clark?
Bartoni?
Thanks, Deb. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but I did have my hand up. So Joe,
I
you
can't
answered
see it, I'm
most.
sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. So Joe, you answered most of the questions that I had. So thanks for your very thorough recap. As far as what Katie was kind of alluding to as on the test without necessarily notifying Mr. Lisk, from what I understand, we're really testing the noise on their aerators though, correct? That's like, and he can't turn those off anyway, right? The fish would die.
Yes, and when I talked with Dr. Thunder, Mr. Newberry and I, there was a hope if we could just turn them off for 10 minutes, we could get
Right.
a solid background level. Conversation those two can have, Dr. Thunder and Mr. Lisk, but there's a way to do it. Dr. Thunder was confident that we could establish the parameters we need to see if what they anticipated would happen with the new equipment has happened.
Okay, so it's almost like we need him there as opposed to doing it without him there. So, that being said, and Joe, I couldn't even tell you the date. You might have it just etched into your memory as to when this all started. I mean, it's been years, and it's time that we do bring this to a conclusion. And Joe, thanks to you and to Travis and your entire team, and to Dr. Thunder and his team for all the work they've done, especially to our residents, Mr. Smith and Mrs. Fisher, for all the time that they have put into this. They've helped educate me as well. And I've learned a lot more about sound than I probably ever knew that was even out there to learn, and still don't know as much as, most, especially, Teresa's, more of an expert on it than I am for sure. But that being said, I think we are ready to take this to council. So I'll make the motion that we approve the department's recommendation and send this to council.
Is there a second? Tracy, are you,
Yeah, I'll second it, but can I ask a question too? Not on the-
can you hold
Oh,
for
sure.
just 1 second because Ms. Clark was, had her hand raised?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Ms. Clark?
Hi, thanks. Well, I agree with what Ms. Dodwell was saying about we need to have the testing done before we proceed with this, because we've had a lot of history here. And we've been told many times by Mr. Lisk that things would be done and that, you know, the testing would be done. And because of the how busy everyone is right now, it might not get done in time. So I just would like to wait myself until we have that test data in hand before we move forward. I kind of see this whole document as two different things. We've got one is the fish pond, and the other is the changing the limits and making a template and deciding on what our tolerances are going to be. And if we could separate that, the fish pond part out of that, I'd be happy with it. But I would like to see that all of those are accomplished first. And when we do the testing, I'm sure Dr. Thunder will make sure of this, but I would like to make sure that all of the aerators are on fully working at the time of testing, and not just some of them or one of them. I know we have tested one before singly, but I think we need to have all of them on so that we can just verify that that noise level.
Thank you. Tracy?
Two things. My second was based on what Joe said, that it would not go, council would not vote on it until we had that testing completed. So my understanding was this is to move it ahead, but council would not vote until we got that testing completed. Is that correct, Joe?
Yes, ma'am. What I was thinking is that at the earliest, the report from the committee would be at City Council on May 10th as a discussion item under work session. And then from there, you could move to prepare legislation, or you could basically say we'd like to wait until we have more time to study the test results, whatever the situation might be. So my commitment would be is not to bring it forward till at least May 10th. And knowing your desire, it could be May 24th before it's finally there.
Okay, thanks. And the only other question I had is on B3, where it prohibits an increase in the number of aquatic organisms. How, I mean, I know nothing about this, but how do you know if there's more organisms being grown or harvested?
The fish are held in pens, and we know the existing count of the number of pens that are in the lake. So if another pen was added, we would make the assumption that aquatic organisms have been added. And so from that perspective, it's just a matter of reviewing aerial photography.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rambo?
Right, thanks. Real quickly. Joe, you might ensure, I can't look at the document right now, but you might ensure that we're talking about only the farmed organisms, because there are a lot of aquatic organisms that may not apply. Just a clarification. But my question was concerning the ambient background nighttime noise levels, because I have seen and dramatically experienced, and probably some of the other folks that have lived in the rural areas of Wildwood for a decade or two have experienced the same thing. And that is the ambient noise level has dropped considerably in the last, particularly in the last decade, but I would say in this century, and study after study after study tell us that we've lost up to 40% of insect life, all insect life in the last 2 decades, and up to 50% of endangered species. And the reason I'm on that soapbox is, as a practical matter, my ambient noise level when I walk outside is significantly lower than it used to be. And if we're worried about the delta between the ambient noise level of the insects and the frogs and so forth, that is dropping, and that would be there'd be a wider gap between that and any arbitrary level that we set. Has that been considered, or can that be considered as we're crafting the ordinance to say, for example, 45 dB, can it be expressed as a differential or anything of that nature? Because someone had a fish farm next to me, I couldn't have heard it in 2010, and I could probably hear it clearly in 2020, and that's only, quite sadly, that's only going to get worse.
Well, Dr. Rambo, it's a very good point, and it's a point that I probably didn't explain as well as I should. But Dr. Thunder, his son, Steve Thunder, and Mr. Newberry and I did discuss that certain locations in, let's say, rural Wildwood are probably far below 45, and it could be bordering on 30 or 32 or 34 decibels. But the analysis to create either areas, pockets, or portions of the rural area with different ambient levels, or creating an average for the rural area, it just seemed like it was a difficult task. And then from the perspective of enforcement, again, just problematic. But what I would suggest is, since we do have some time kind of programmed into this process to ensure testing is completed at the aquaculture site, I will return with Dr. Thunder. I'll ask him to review your comments from the video and see if there is an option that could be considered at City Council when the memorandum arrives there.
Sure, there are places like if you're in deep woods, it's noisier. I mean, it would be too difficult to be. It would have to be site specific, and that's unworkable. But I was just thinking more of some methodology for if there is a complaint, check the ambient noise level at whatever time of the year or the complaints coming in, and then turn on the pumps, so to speak, and see what the difference is. And if we come up with a delta, some sort of this is the maximum allowable noise level above the ambient background noise, that would work. It would just require a sort of a review process, and maybe the plaintiff could help fund that or something like that. I'm just spitballing here, but the concept is worth pursuing. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Mr. Garantano?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, and my comments are probably going to be similar to Ms. Clark, that Mr. Smith had expressed a desire that we wait until the study be completed. And I know that this is an issue that's been around since 2012. So, there's probably some fatigue that is setting in and trying to get this to move forward. But I also think if we've been waiting this long, what's a little bit more to wait for the study? The concern is that we bring it to council. There's 8 other council members that are not in these conversations, the detail that we've been having. And so I just don't know if, we just wait till we get it finished up the right way and send it over or not. So that's all. I'm just trying to think about, Mr. Smith's request.
Mr. Garantano, are you making an amendment to the motion?
Not at this time. I'm curious to hear other thoughts.
Ms. Clark? Is your hand up?
Yes, that is. Mr. Smith and Ms. Fisher have been, they have been so patient, and they have really good points. I talked to them just recently, and they're very appreciative of what's been done, especially as of late. And they're very appreciative of Mr. Vunich and his team and how everyone has worked together to push this forward. I just still think we should hold off until we have the data in hand. Also, I had a question for you, Joe. If this CUP is granted, and we have, and they go ahead and build a structure there, a house on there to live in, then is that house under the, does it have to abide by the home business regulations for a homeowner and no mechanical equipment used except for domestic household equipment?
No, ma'am. Ms. Clark, our zoning ordinance allows 2 permitted uses to exist. And I say that knowing that the current aquaculture operation is legal, non-conforming, but it was permitted when first authorized, and the single-family dwelling is a permitted use in the NU non-urban resident district. So the dwelling could be constructed and the aquaculture operation could continue to function under its current parameters. It could not expand, it could not do any of the items that are identified in that section of the zoning code. So I guess what I'm saying is both could coexist there now. One would be an expansion, the dwelling. The other would have to stay in current status.
And one more question, the ANSI standard that we're using but per Dr. Thunder's suggestion, is there a way we can get an entire copy of that? We got a little piece of it.
Yes, ma'am. We'll order that from the organization. And if we have the delay to the next meeting, as soon as we receive it, we'll send it out to you in advance.
Okay, I think that it might behoove us to really review that and look at the chart that they have in the ANSI standard showing the decibel levels for different category of land, residential land, and develop something like that instead of by individual, by determining ambient noise on each individual circumstance. I think we need to have a set chart that we go by instead of determining it one by one. And it wasn't, didn't Dr. Thunder recommend that we, or at least suggest we do something based on population density?
There was a bit of a conversation relating to that. Again, in the context of my most recent conversation with Dr. Thunder, my impression was that he did not feel that there was a high level of variability in the rural area of Wildwood that would justify the tier standard. And so that's why we focused, I think, in our last conversation more on trying to understand if there's an approach that I guess would be that safety net, that if we are in a truly quiet environment, 45 would be too loud. But we did talk about some other existing requirements in the noise code that gives the purview to the city to make a determination of nuisance. It's just that a nuisance action requires a whole lot of cooperation from the prosecuting attorney and the municipal court, because it is more of a contested case and there is a trial. So we'll see.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting, at least from 2 of the committee members, direction to see if there's, to kind of go back and take another look at it.
Ms. Dodwell? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Clark, go ahead.
No, I think that's a good thing to do. And sorry, lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
Ms. Dodwell?
All good conversations, everybody. I just wanted to double check and make sure that we do review the current ambient sound levels and give that information to Dr. Thunder. Is he assessing based upon our current ambient sound levels for that particular area?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Could we also have him review the ANSI standards rather than have a city council member or city council committee review those, since he's the sound analyst and give us his recommendations on if there is some kind of a chartered approach that we could use for other areas within the city of Wildwood, so as to minimize the individual review of every single addition, change, request. I'm just thinking from a planning standpoint that would maybe make it easier for you guys. But we've got the expertise in a sound engineer / expert. I'm just trying to see how we can use him as effectively as possible to build those scales for us, or those standards for us.
Well, certainly if the motion that's on the floor were not to pass, the department will reintroduce the idea of a tiered approach, or something that maybe is a little finer tuned to the circumstances that exist in the rural areas of the city.
And plus, I also concur with what Dr. Rambo had to say about the continued slippage of what noise levels actually are in the world today, and what things we can hear and what things we can't hear anymore. And so perhaps Dr. Thunder, I'm about ready to sneeze, sorry you guys. Perhaps Dr. Thunder could take an approach that would also add that into it as well. I really appreciate what Dr. Rambo had to say there.
Ms. Clark?
Yes, thanks, Chair McCutcheon. Mr. Bonich, if this was to pass tonight, if we voted yes on this, what is the $12,500 all that does that cover both of the testing of the 100, 109 strip and the fish farm testing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Before we vote, I'd just like to make a comment too, regarding Mr. Fisher or Mrs. Fisher and Mr. Smith's comments. I've been supportive of the residents, and I continue to do so. So their comments were very important. And I do agree with them that we have to have some sort of documentation that Mr. Lisk has actually done what he said he's done. And then I would also like to get some, once we get the sound study, I'd like to get some input from the residents who live around the Lisk property. There's been a lot of contention between the Lisk farm and the residents, so I think we need to get some definitive input on them before we take a final vote. I'm certainly would request, as well as several of you, that we get some more information before we go ahead and move this to council. And then I have one question. So you're talking about the noise level at 45. Is that true that it could then go up to 50?
Actually, no. The current noise code, as well as the proposed change, would still retain the discrete tone deduction. So in the situation of the aquaculture operation, the older aerators and blowers had a discrete tone, so that 45 would have been reduced to 40 decibels based upon the discrete tone, and that's retained in the noise code. So now it's 50 and 45 decibels, it would be 45 and 40.
Ms. Clark?
Yeah, I had a question about that because as I understand the variable, the measured variable is the one that gets changed, not the set number of, we set the noise level that it can reach, and then we would add to our decibel level that we, the decibel A level that we that we get on the reading. So if we got a reading of 37, we would add to it 5 and see if it met the 40 or whatever it is. We would add to the one that is variable instead of the one that's set.
Well, that's not how I understood it. So again, I'll check with Dr. Thunder, but from his original report from the initial testing, my recollection is the description noted that the standard was what they were, I guess, the operational standard. I think you're right. Dr. Thunder basically described a decibel level of the aerators as extrapolated out with the new one on and the others being replaced. And then the discrete tone would be a reduction to that. It's a reduction though, because the standard becomes tougher or let's say more arduous to address the discrete tone. So I'll have to do a little research with Dr. Thunder for you.
Any more comments before we take a vote? Mr. Newberry, will you please read the motion?
Madam Chair, I'm doing all of that tonight for you. So
Oh, okay, Mr. Vunich, will you please read the motion?
yes, ma'am, I'd be glad to. Mr. Bartoni made a motion to move forward the recommendations contained in the memorandum to City Council. That particular motion was seconded by Councilmember Nyan.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those
Aye.
opposed? 3 in favor? 4 in favor? All those opposed?
Madam
And
Chair,
I'm opposed as well, so we have
can
a
I do a
tie.
roll call?
Yeah, can we do a roll call, Deb? I'm a little,
Yeah.
like, I don't think we have 8 people here to have a 4-4 vote.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was on mute.
I think
Sorry.
somebody said yes twice, but yes, a roll call vote is a good idea.
Thank
Mr.
you, ma'am.
Mooney?
I appreciate it. Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
No,
Councilmember Dodwell,
No.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
No,
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Reluctant, no.
pardon me, Chair McCutcheon.
Yes, no. Yes, Ms. McCutcheon, no is my vote.
you're confusing us.
He's the one that voted
Failed.
twice.
Now it's 5-5.
Uh-oh.
Math was never my forte, I'm sorry. So the motion fails, correct?
Yes, ma'am. If there's not another motion, this will be back on the committee's agenda at its May meeting.
Okay, so now we are under our action items for planning matters is noise analysis for residential areas along State Route 100, State Route 109, and other major arterial roadways, all wards.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, the department is seeking no action tonight on this particular item. This item is more informational. As I mentioned, Mr. Newberry and I had a conversation with Acoustical Associates, Dr. Thunder's company, and they intend to begin the analysis of the roadway corridors in early May or in approximately 2 weeks. They hope to have all of it completed in terms of a report back to the committee sometime in early July. So the process will take approximately 2 months. And Mr. Newberry and I owe Dr. Thunder a couple of items. What I would like to do to make sure that the analysis is complete, Dr. Thunder wanted to know where most of the complaints regarding noise from the corridors are coming from in terms of locations. And so the department is preparing a map that identifies those locations it knows of. With your permission, I'll send it out to the committee members so you all can verify what Mr. Newberry and I have identified. But if we've missed some locations, then you can add.
Any comments? Questions?
The cat had a comment.
Oh, I should mute. I'm sorry, guys.
Ms. Clark?
The comment.
Yes, Mr. Runich, just to let you know that I have been in contact with Rita and Tom Hudson, and they live in Lafayette Trails over at the Pond Grover Loop on the Ward 1 side. And they said they are very happy for you to use their property to set up any testing equipment if you needed to. Passing that on.
Well, thank you very much, and my appreciation to the property owners. That's very kind of them.
Any other comments? So that was an informational item only, and you are not asking for any kind of vote, direction, support?
No, ma'am. I just wanted to ensure that the committee knew of the timeline, because I know there's a lot of people anxious to get this started and find out what we have and what we don't have and the steps we need to take. So I was pretty happy that it was going to be early May.
Thank you. Our next action item under planning matters is Memorial Tribute Program, Historic Preservation Commission's All Wards.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, the city has had a Historic Preservation Commission since approximately 1999. There was an informal commission established by City Council as early as 1996, but the ordinance actually creating the standing commission occurred again in 1999. Since that time, a number of individuals have served on that commission and served well the city in terms of historic preservation and restoration. Fast forward to a few years ago and the untimely death of Lisa Kelp. Lisa Kelp was killed in a car accident on State Route 109. Ms. Kelp at the time was president of the Wildwood Historical Society, a private organization not affiliated with the city, but had been integral in kind of mending bridges between that private organization and the city's Historic Preservation Commission. She also had done many things to assist the city in terms of information relating to topical items that were on agendas for the Historic Preservation Commission. Acknowledging all of that, the commission members wanted to kind of provide her some type of recognition, either at Old Pond School or somewhere, some other location of publicly owned property. As it was discussed, the commission members wanted to expand just beyond Ms. Kelp and do something for others that have exercised a lot of time, energy, and resources in this particular area. And so after months of discussion, the Historic Preservation Commission created a memorial tribute program. There are 3 tiers or levels to that program. There is the Champions of Conservancy, the Sustaining Members, and Guardians of History. Those 3 tiers also have 2 different components. One is for public officials and one is for private individuals. This particular memorial tribute program was presented to City Council at a work session and referred to committee. There were, I think, concerns that it might create some friction amongst others that have served if they were not recognized and someone else would be, or that it might create friction between other commissions, committees, and boards that do serve the city as well. I want to emphasize that for someone to be nominated and then acknowledged and approved, the list of items is not independent of each other. All of those items must be met to obtain that level of recognition. So in the case of, let's say, the public component, and a champion of conservancy. All 5 of those must exist before the nomination application would be accepted. Not just 1 or 2 or combination of the 5, but all 5. And the same holds true for the private individual and all of the tiers associated with either. I think that was a concern that was spoken. So I believe the Historic Preservation Commission wanted to create a high standard, not an unattainable standard, but a high standard, but certainly not one that just someone serving for 1 term, maybe been a chair on that commission for a year, could receive something, I think, that is relatively nice and certainly would stand the test of time. I would also note, as I did in the conversation at work session with City Council, Commissioner Scott on the Historic Preservation Commission did bring up the issue of, will this basically offend or cause friction with other city boards, commissions, and committees? And the department did acknowledge that that is a possibility, but certainly this is a template. If it works, maybe we can consider moving it on to others. If it doesn't, then we know probably we shouldn't. And so with that, I'm going to conclude, Madam Chair, and take any questions or comments you might have regarding the Memorial Tribute Program. Certainly, if there are things you want changed, I would appreciate hearing them tonight, and then I will take them back to the commission and we can work from there. Thank you.
Ms. Nayad?
I just had a clarification question. Is this something then that the committee nominates people? Could this be a nomination from anyone in the community? And is it like a yearly, okay, it's time to nominate who we want on this year? Or is it just as people meet these qualifications, they can be nominated? Are there like a certain amount of people you would, nominate per year and take? Or is it just randomly as people come up, you could take as many a year? Maybe there's a year you don't have anyone, or I just wondered what those numbers look like.
Ms. Diane, any individual, and I would say individual as a resident, can nominate. And so it could come from yourself, it could come from a member of the commission, it could come from a member of the society. So there will be an application form that is available on the website if the tribute program is authorized, and then anyone can nominate. I believe the thought is that it would be done on a yearly basis, not just when someone submitted it. I think that could strain the Historic Preservation Commission's
We lose Joe?
announcement
I
at the
think
start
so.
Start of the new
Shoot.
year.
We lost you, Joe, for about 30 seconds.
Oh, sorry.
Could you rewind, please?
I'll do my best. Ms. Nyan, the questions. First and foremost, anyone can nominate. And so when I say anyone, that would be a resident of the city. And the intent would be for the person nominated to also be a resident of the city. It is a program for the city. The process, I believe, would be done on a yearly basis, not when applications are submitted. Applications would be held if they're received during the year. And the department is recommending that we do it at the end of each calendar year and make the announcement at the start of the new year.
Mr. Garantano?
Yeah, I was going through the information that you provided, and maybe some of this is more just seeking clarification, Joe. But one of the themes that I recognized in your memo when you spoke with and did your research from the State Historic Preservation Office, and then also even with St. Louis County, is that they look to honor more a specific program or event versus an individual. And that was consistent in looking at the State Historic Preservation Office comments that you have there and the counties. So I thought that actually now started to, was making sense to me. Like, we want to make sure that we're recognizing, individuals associated with some kind of action, some kind of activity. So it doesn't become sort of like just awarding, someone, for no specific reason, the honor there. So how are we making sure that we're aligned with that, Joe, so that this way we are, truly valuing some kind of project, performance that they did. And then as I read it, just confirm for me, these are again, all, when we look at the criteria to honor someone in this, the champions of conservancy, sustaining member or guardian, these, one of the criteria is you have to be with the Historic Preservation Commission. It's not like, Rob Rambo is Wildwood Citizen of the Year just because I want to give it to him, right?
Everyone does.
Yes, for the public component, you have to have been either on or previously served on the Historic Preservation Commission. Dr. Rambo, in his case, could be a private individual recognized for that service, but the private individuals don't get, let's say, the number of recognition items that are potentially available to a public, to the person participating with the public entity, the commission. And certainly we can take this back to the commission and focus more on projects and the individuals or organization involved in the project. So that's an option.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be something I would look to make sure that there is something there, so that we are being very selective, making them a member of the Historic Preservation Commission or Historical Society, or I guess as long as we've got that historic criteria in there, I think is key. Again, just to kind of keep it focused on this, because if there are other ways, if there's somebody that comes along that the city feels
I got you, Katie.
honored, we can handle it even through the council as a resolution or something like that. We can do that, but I want to make sure this is specifically coming from the Historic Preservation Commission, and therefore, it's going to be tied to that role there. So that would be the feedback I would have, and I just hope that makes sense, or if anybody has any other different thoughts.
Rob?
Yes, just real quickly, I wanted to, I think I like item E, provided another type of unique and or significant historical contribution to the city and area's history, because that gives us discretion as council members and so forth to nominate people. It doesn't have to necessarily, it can go through the Historic Preservation Committee, but it can recognize someone who, for example, donates a historic building or some historic photographs or items or something significant to Wildwood, and it could be Wildwood Museum, the Historical Society. There's plenty of ways to honor folks, but I guess so I agree with Joe, but I would also emphasize the exclusivity or the idea that this has to be sort of hard to obtain, at least the highest level. And I don't know if we have sufficient numbers of historical heroes to nominate every year. And so I would just say, focus on the exclusivity, and it could be sort of an ad hoc thing. And maybe we do a yearly review or something. I don't know. I wouldn't want it to fall off the table, but I think it's a great idea. I just think I'll use myself as an example. I was Missouri Farm of farmer of the year because it got down to the 11th hour, I think, and they didn't know anybody else. And I was a warm body. And so I got this honor, and it's a plaque, and I think it's very cool. But I think of a farmer as someone who has spent his life, driving a tractor and that sort of thing. And so I don't feel truly deserving of that honor, even though I'm a legitimate farmer. So I would hate to see us in that situation. So it's worth another pass through the committee, Joe, to talk about the exclusivity or the selectivity of the award. That's it. Thanks.
Ms. Dodwell?
I was just going to make a motion if a motion is needed to say, let's move forward with this. Let's try it and see how it works and what things might need to be improved and how we might use it in other categories throughout the city as we go forward. But until we put our toe in the water on something like this, I don't think we could spend days and weeks and months trying to figure out the scales and the evaluation criteria, et cetera. Let's give it a stab, and let's recognize some people who have done things to help preserve the history of Wildwood. So I'm making a motion, if you need one, to go ahead and approve moving this forward.
Is there a second? Mr. Bartoni, are you seconding? Ms. Clark, do you have a comment?
Nope, just was gonna second.
I think agree with Joe and Rob. I think some things need to be tied down a little bit. And then also, where is the funding going to come from to support this project? And there's other ways the city currently has of celebrating an individual or a group. Isn't that true, Mr. Vunich?
Madam Chair, as I believe Mr. Garitano mentioned, the city council has the authority to issue proclamations or pass resolutions recognizing individuals or organizations for that fact.
So will you state the motion, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, the motion was made by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Bartoni to move forward with the Memorial Tribute Program as presented.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Opposed, me.
Opposed. Mr. Garantano's opposed. Any abstentions?
Madam Chair.
Could I hear, hey, Dan, if you're comfortable, would you tell us what your objection was?
My objection is the fact that there is a program in place if we find that someone is qualified to get recognized. I think this is opening a can of worms personally for other commissions and things like that to want to be recognized. And then we're going into this recognizing people all the time. And I just have concern about how that's going to go. It's kind of like that flooded sidewalk thing that I was against a few months ago in another area. I just, it just opens a bunch of doors, in my opinion.
I'm presuming that we're going to tighten up the requirements or make it a little bit harder to get, and that's the reason for my yes vote. Because Katie's right, we need to move some things forward. So
Well,
anyway, sorry about that side.
I do have a question, because I'm for it, but with tightening it up. So what's the next step? Are we sending? I thought the vote was to send it to council as is. So if the intent was to tighten it up, weren't we going to send it back to the commission?
Ms. Dodwell, you made the motion. Can you respond, Mr. Garantano?
I don't think it needs to go back to the commission, because until we go through at least one iteration of nominating somebody, we're not going to know really what needs to be tightened, what needs to be expanded. I think the commission has already spent a great deal of time putting together the matrix that you see here right now. I don't know that at this point in the game, they're going to be able to add a whole lot. So that's just why I was saying, let's just approve it, move it towards council and see what happens later this year. And if we have to tweak it, then we can send it back to HPC and say, okay, you need to better define this or better define that. But I know I'm grasping at straws to say what additional hardening of this do we need to do? I don't really know.
We're in the middle of a vote. So, Mr. Rambo, is this particularly related to getting clarification?
Yeah, it was. It's just I agree with everything Ms. Dodwell says, but I don't know whether this is as it exists on the document, if it's on an ad hoc basis or we're going to try to find somebody every year, because that would affect the how hard it would be for us to implement it and check it out. In other words, if it's just an ad hoc thing, we can wait until someone gets nominated and run it through the process and see if it works. But if it's an annual thing, I don't think we're ready to do that.
So, Mr. Vonich, what was the outcome of the vote?
Based upon the voice vote, I had 5 in favor and 3 against.
So the motion passes.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So Joe, can you answer that question? Does the document say that it's on an ad hoc basis, or does it give a timeline like an annual award or anything? Because I didn't see that.
It was intended, I believe, from conversations with the commission members that it be on an ad hoc basis.
Okay.
We would obviously publicize the program and just kind of wait and see how the community responds to the program.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
And our next action item under planning matters is the selection of engineering expertise for stormwater management needs, all wards.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, many of you are aware that the Watershed Erosion Task Force has identified 9 priority locations that are in need of repair or restoration due to erosion and what I would consider unique storm events over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. Those 9 priority projects are, for the most part, identified because of the threat to public infrastructure or private property. The Watershed Erosion Task Force has also supported and forwarded to the City Council a recommendation to place the Parks and Stormwater Sales Tax on a future ballot for Wildwood residents to consider. One of the items the Watershed Erosion Task Force feels very strongly about is that to provide support for the sales tax initiative, the cost of these projects in general terms needs to be provided. Without knowing the cost, the argument for the need obviously would suffer. And so with that, the Watershed Erosion Task Force has been pursuing the development of those cost estimates. Most recently, the Department of Planning and the Department of Public Works were able to contact John Jones of Brightwater Engineers. Mr. Jones recommended 2 individuals, Joe Wilson, a professional engineer headquartered out of Rolla, Todd Wagner, another engineer headquartered out of Springfield, Missouri, as good resources for this initiative. Mr. Jones, who resides in Colorado, said that for us to proceed forward, we need registered engineers in the state of Missouri that are familiar with the type of soils and environment we're dealing with here in Wildwood. In conversations with Mr. Wagner and Mr. Wilson, they have provided a scope of services that are being presented to the committee tonight. The total cost for all services is $28,500, and that will provide us preliminary engineering concepts to develop the cost estimates associated with the priority projects. Therefore, tonight, the department is respectfully requesting support of this contract based upon the direction it has received from the Watershed Erosion Task Force. Funding does exist in the Capital Improvements Program for 2021, and it was intended, I believe, when set aside at the start of the fiscal year for services such as this. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Ms. Clark?
Joe, is that 28,000, is that um, from the top of the 125,000, or had we already spent some of that 125,000?
Some of the 125,000 has been allocated, but it's been a very small amount. Some for John Jones, Wright Water Engineers, for some preliminary direction regarding the inflation factor relative to cost of engineering services and materials that was requested at the start of the year. We've also spent a little on stipends for different visits that consultants have made. And not so much just to get their feet wet, but also they provided valuable input. But we have the lion's share of it available right now.
So I guess I was under the impression that we were going to have get with Dr. Hammer and get a conceptual price on each one of these so that we could move forward with just a very an estimated conceptual price, so that we didn't have to spend so much money just to get that concept going.
I believe Dr. Hammer is in full support. He is not on the Zoom webinar tonight, but I think it's critical that engineers develop the preliminary engineering concepts, and also engineers use the unit cost index that's available to determine what Mr. Jones has called high-level reconnaissance estimates. And so Dr. Hammer will be a participant. Mr. Wilson has already started looking at some of the preliminary engineering concepts. They talked today about what Dr. Hammer thought. So I see it as actually a three-legged stool, so to speak. But tonight we're trying to bring on board the two engineers.
Mr. Garantano?
Oh, my question got answered.
Ms. Dodwell?
If you go back and you look through the project description from Mr. Wilson's quote, it details out specifically which areas of the city they're going to be looking at under project description. And reading through that, it appears to be the same information that we've talked about in our, what's it called? Our long-term planning process as to which creek positions we need to be assessing first, where we think we have the biggest problems right now. And so I'm in full support of us moving ahead, using the funds to get a better handle on overall costs for any kind of improvements along our waterways. And so I'm going to make a motion that we approve it, this and get it started ASAP.
Mr. Bartoni, are you seconding?
Yes.
Mr. Garantano, do you have a comment?
No, I was offering a second.
Okay. I do have a comment. So, Mr. Williams, can you explain to me why Evergreen has gone down to 1.6?
Again, Chair McCutcheon, as you know, the Watershed Erosion Task Force defined 9 priority projects. There was some debate how that priority should be set for the 9. The triple meander on Cox Creek north of Anniversary Park was one that the experts concluded was the top one. And so it's part of the top 9. And my feeling again is that it is Evergreen Forest is a priority project and one that will receive a preliminary engineering design work and a cost estimate, just as the other 8.
And so I'm going to make the same comment that you all, some of you have all heard already. So I apologize for that, but I won't apologize for supporting my residents. I was a little surprised to see a business set above a resident. So our residents are the backbone of our city, and there is at least one resident who lives on Evergreen whose home and livelihood is threatened. And I think that certainly deserves a higher priority than supporting structure for a business. So while I am totally in support and that we definitely have to deal with our watershed erosion, I can't support this particular concept because Evergreen has moved down, and I think it is extremely important that we support our residents, especially residents whose life and liberty are at stake here.
Ms. McCutcheon, can I?
Yes,
Can I speak, since Elegant Child does fall into my ward?
of course.
The reason for looking at that is the erosion damage in that particular area. Even though it's listed as Elegant Child, all of the subdivision on the west side of the creek that runs through that area and along other portions of that area are impacted by what's going on here. I don't see that this list says we have to do number one first before we start any work on anything else. I think we're doing these in concert with each other, and we'll get a price on what each of them will cost, and then it'll be up to the city council to determine, based on those prices, based on those bids, which one do we do first, which one do we do second, or which can we do at the same time by different vendors. So I guess I wouldn't make a harsh assumption that we have moved down what is a concern at Evergreen any more so than what we're seeing along the main channel of Cox Creek, where I have people in Clayton, McBride homes that have half their yards gone already too. So I think we all have issues that we need to deal with, and I'm glad that we're able to address multiple wards here. So I'm going to vote for this.
Well, according to the written description, these projects are presented in order of priority. And so 1.2 is Elegant Child and Evergreen is 1.6. I understand other properties have difficulties with erosion. However, I've not seen one yet whose foundation is at great risk at any moment and sliding all the way into the creek. So I think there's a great distinction there between what you were just saying about the homeowners along your creek versus homeowners in a different location. And it was my understanding from reading other documents that one of the main issues in the 1.2 area is the Elegant Child and how the bank is cutting into that structure as well in support of it. So again, I'm totally in support of the Watershed Erosion Committee. I'm totally in support of getting funding for projects, but I can't support this particular one because Evergreen is no longer a priority as it has been listed other places. I'm glad it's one of the 9, but again, I support the residents of Ward 5, so that's where I'm coming from. Mr. Garantano?
Yeah, I think Katie made a good point here. I mean, we're not pulling the trigger as far as actual work to start, and there'll be opportunity for that discussion at some point. And I'm sure you'll make the point about Evergreen at that time. But I think right now, this is just so that we can, get this started here. So I don't think it will make a difference for this piece of work, whether it's 1, 2, 3. I mean, it's there. But, the right thing to do, and, so that it's also looked at more from a quantitative perspective, is that there'll probably be some kind of measures to evaluate the criteria here, so that it's really out of even our hands. It's kind of based what the science tells us here to, what needs to be addressed first. So that I'll leave to the experts. And even, I'm a little uncomfortable even talking about, it, because it's a watershed erosion task force item, and you got all the experts and the folks that have been involved in that team there. So, I know probably from a formality perspective, it has to go through the committee here, but if there's a place for the discussion, that's the place to have it, I think, with the watershed erosion task force.
Ms. Clark?
Yeah, I agree with what Mr. Garitano said. It's this piece is just one of the criteria involved in deciding which how we weight each one of these items. I don't think we've got a good weight on them yet. We have to know how much each one's going to cost. We have to know timing. We have to know the urgency and the the slope, angle. We have just a whole list of criteria. And I've been talking with Dr. Hammer a lot about this. And after we get all of this information, then we can put it together and weight all of these items and put them in a better prioritized chart, as well as looking at all of the root causes. And so that we don't keep addressing all of the issues that are just arising because we haven't fixed the root cause of the problem. Maybe it's a detention pond or whatever, but we can't spend all of our money all the time on all of the symptoms and miss the disease. So I think that this is just one of those formalities so that we can get more of the information to put it together and know better how to prioritize these. I wouldn't think that this list is set in stone the way it's listed right now.
Mr. Vunich?
And thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if this will affect anyone's opinion, but the intent is to receive cost estimates for all 9 projects and to develop those cost estimates, the preliminary design concept that would be associated with it. I think the Department of Planning and the Watershed Erosion Task Force would be amiss if we sent you recommendations for projects and you didn't know the cost. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'm being a little bit too literal, but I'm going exactly by the way it was written. Because it says it's an order of priority. And I know there's been a lot of discussion at council about that. And I noticed there's been a lot of discussion about the Watershed Erosion Committee on that as well. And I understand we need cost estimates, and I understand we probably need additional information. But again, I represent Ward 5, and this is a dire issue, a life and death issue in some instances. And so I can't support this this plan. So I thank everyone for listening to me and for everyone's opinion. But as a Ward 5 representative, I just can't support this at this point in time. Any other comments? Mr. Vunich, you're looking for some action from us?
Yes, there is a motion on the floor that was made by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Bartoni, to recommend the approval of Wilson Hydro LLC for the purposes of their scope of services.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Opposed? Any abstain? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Our next action item comes under park matters, and the first item is Bellevue Farms, St. Paul Road, update and site restoration needs all wards.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, as you are aware from a previous update that was provided to City Council, the Department of Planning and Parks was successful in receiving a $25,000 grant from the Missouri Department of Conservation for invasive removal and restoration of a certain area of Bellevue Farms. The area that is intended to be removed, to have invasive removal and to be restored is the front 5.5 acres that is between where the former single-family dwelling was located and the access road from St. Paul Road. I believe Mr. Newberry has a representation of that. And the area identified in the shading is Bellevue Farms Park. And the area intended for the restoration is that cleared area that is not wooded. And Mr. Newberry is doing a very competent job of identifying that. And so the item tonight is presented to you so you're aware of the process. The Friends of Bellevue, the not-for-profit organization that formed to assist in the restoration and removal of invasives from Bellevue Farm Park, has also received 2 grants at $6,000. So in total, there has been an award from the Missouri Department of Conservation of $37,000 to basically restore this property that had not had much tender loving care for many, many years. So the first and foremost, the department is just advising you of what's going on out at Bellevue Farms Park. And secondly, from the perspective of the city, once we do that restoration and invasive removal in the field, the department will be at each budget year for the next 2 years advising you of a need to basically tend to it. It was described to the department as the first year is kind of you basically restore, the second year you wait, and the third year you reap the rewards of the grow. And so again, I just want to advise you that there's a couple more years out there where we need to tend to this particular matter. But it is the intent of the department to submit grant applications again to the Missouri Department of Conservation for those efforts in the next couple of years. No action is required on this tonight, but again, the department just wanted to advise you of what's going on in Bellevue Farms Park. Thank you.
Mr. Rambo, do you have a comment?
Yeah, real quickly. I think this is a great thing. I fully support it. This memorandum seems to describe the restoration of the meadow and doesn't talk about the honeysuckle removal, the forested areas. Joe, was that funded by another grant and that's well underway?
Yes, that invasive removal in the forested or woodland areas is what Friends of Bellevue has been funded for, and they've been underway with that for a bit. They've also removed quite a few cedars in that understory as well.
Awesome. So I'd love to go over there, but in the meantime, this particular document, I don't know, I don't really know the state of the contract or whatever, and maybe that's beyond the scope of this meeting, but the explanation of what's going to happen is quite vague. The seed mix is unknown, the species and the chemicals used and so forth. I'd love to see the plan. That's, if possible, that's one thing. But the more important factor is that the warranty work, the warranty is quite specific. And it says that a contract is needed, a stewardship contract is needed in order to, a multi-year contract in order to provide any sort of warranty. And for native seeded areas, which is what we're talking about here, if the seed performance is below average, they'll overseed in the winter following the first growing season. That's the extent of the warranty. And this particular process is Heartbreak City. It's going to be very tough. I would not be at all surprised, despite DGM's best efforts, if it failed or nearly failed. they're counting on correcting some of their problems by using, herbicides in subsequent years that we're going to pay for, which is probably may not be the right approach. So I have some questions and concerns about this program, but I'm going to vote for it just so we have the funding. And I would like to, I think that's appropriate. And I'd kind of like to, talk to you or the right people about the plan to make sure they succeed, because I've done this a number of times and it's fraught with potential problems.
And certainly the department is aware of it. We tried this in the Great Meadow at Community Park. We didn't have much success there. There were a lot of reasons for that, I think, but principally, it's just tough to do. It's tough to restore in an area that has not had care for a long period of time. The good news here is at Bellevue Farms Park, MDC has made a major commitment to make this work. And we are using one of the few firms in town, DJM Ecological Services, that has some experience in all of this. Again, there's no funding required of the city at this stage. And as I've mentioned, the next couple of years will be funded hopefully through MDC in terms of a commitment.
Okay, yeah. So I'm skeptical but hopeful. So as long as we don't have much skin in the game, I thought I saw a figure that we were paying, but that must be grant money. So let's just hope for the best. But in the meantime, if I could get a look at that plan, I'd really appreciate it.
Consider it done, sir.
Thank you.
Any more comments?
I was just gonna say, I second the gentleman that was recognized as the Missouri Farmer of the Year. I will defer to his expertise on this.
Mr. Vunich, I
I can
understand.
see my plaque. Sorry.
That's okay. I understand you're not looking for a vote. Is that correct, Mr. Vunich?
That's correct, ma'am. I just want to keep you kind of in the loop because there is some long-term commitment, hopefully none of which will require taxpayers' money from Wildwood residents. But I also just want you to know it is a tough sell, so to speak, to get it to work. And we're counting on MDC and this consultant that MDC is funding through its grant to make it work. But as with anything, there are risks, and I think you as committee members should know those risks.
Thank you. Our next item under parks is the maintenance proposal for the pedestrian bridge over Carr Creek, Ward 6.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, many of you were here in 2003 when a small group opened the Al Foster Memorial Trailhead and the segment that goes from Glencoe to Sherman Beach. Surprisingly, at that time, the use of that trail was not very extensive. And as of today, we know that's changed radically, and it is probably one of the most popular trail corridors in all of the St. Louis metropolitan area, if not the two-state region of Illinois and Missouri. Over the course of time, a lot of partners have participated in making that area even better for trail users, bicyclists, hikers, and many, many others. Those partners have been good partners, but no one, I think, has done more than the city of Wildwood to create a world-class trail system along the Merrimack River and the Merrimack River Valley. To that end, several years ago, Great Rivers Greenway purchased a half-mile corridor from the Marinus Retreat Center and did that southern extension of the Al Foster Memorial Trail. Principally, Great Rivers Greenway paid all of the cost. There was some funds provided by the city of Wildwood through the city council's action, but the majority, if not almost all, was paid by Great Rivers Greenway. As part of that agreement that was authorized by city council, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources agreed to maintain the trail and the corridor. And the city of Wildwood agreed to maintain the 100-foot pedestrian bridge span over Carr Creek near its confluence, or I should say its intersection with the Merrimack River. I'll show you a picture of the pedestrian bridge. Here it is. It's a great viewing spot for when the river is flooded and you can still get to it. But as is noted in the memorandum, this particular bridge has been topped twice now by the Merrimack River. Once in 2015-16, right around the holiday season, and then in the spring of 2017. And here is the aerial photograph of the location. Recently, an inspection was done by the Department of Planning and Parks, and what we're getting is a lot of mold growing on the bridge. It was not susceptible to such until the last two major floods. And so what the department would like to do is expend $21,000 out of its operating budget line item for parks maintenance to have the bridge power washed, remove all the invasive moss, and then do touch up to it. And according to the contractor, will carry us forward for the next decade and keep it in good condition and aesthetically pleasing. And so tonight the department is presenting the low bid of the three received for acceptance and recommendation by the committee. With that, Madam Chair, I'll conclude. And if there are any questions or comments, the department will be glad to try to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Garantano?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a motion with the department's recommendation with the Walsh Painting Company to power wash and provide touch-up services. And the proposal's reasonable compared to what we've seen out there. And actually, I'm trying to work on download a picture. I have a picture of the river, the water reaching the very bottom of the bridge. If I can get it downloaded on my computer, happy to share it. So I've seen that area get flooded quite a bit, and I was actually down there Sunday. So it's a nice area. It's getting a lot of good foot traffic now, and that's a nice bridge. It's not that old. So yeah, to hear that, that water and the moss and all can start to affect the rust, it's probably a good idea. Let's get that cleaned up. But I'm afraid too, this might not be the last time, because we've had some issues with that river flooding from a couple of years. It hasn't been a while, but I think maybe a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago.
18, it came pretty close to topping again the bridge, but it didn't. It was a lower level flood, but I was amazed that the bridge was actually covered over. You couldn't even know it was, you wouldn't even have known it was there. A lot of water.
I have a picture if you want to see it. I can show you. I think this is it right here. Let me see.
I would say thank you to the Corps of Engineers that's changed the way the waterways treat our water. Wow.
So I think that's it, Joe, right? Because that's the bridge and there's the water coming up right underneath it. And that's the creek, right? So, all right.
Thank you for sharing. So we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? Ms. Nyad seconds the motion. Mr. Rambo, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just saying my counterparts are in violation of the council bro code because this is in Ward 6 and I should have been able to make the motion or the second, but I'll let it slide this time.
I'd be happy to switch it out if you want to go be the maker.
It is not that important to me. As long as it happens, I'm just jerking you guys change.
It's a council, you can have it. How about that?
All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Our next item of business is update on the virtual recreation programs, followed by the update report and facility reservations. Does anyone have any specific questions for either one of those two informational items? Ms. Clark?
I don't see the plein air on here.
The virtual programs generally, that's going to be in person. So May 1st, if you have a camera or if you believe to be an artist, you are more than welcome to register. All are welcome, regardless of abilities or talents. So we hope to see you.
Are there any other matters for consideration? Seeing none, are there any citizens that have joined us, Mr. Newberry, that we need to respond to?
Ma'am,
Do I hear a motion for adjournment? Ms. Clark and Mr. Flasher? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? Motion passes. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for a great meeting.
Have a
Ma-
good evening,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thanks, you guys. Everybody have